In previous lessons, we spent some time talking about the foundations of Kant's deontological ethics. Now, what we then went and did was go around spending some time talking about how he actually practically and pragmatically formulates systems for which we can make judgments on ethical principles. This is, of course, through the utilization of his categorical imperative. But in the earliest lesson on Kantian ethics, we made reference to the foundations of his normative ethical theory, talking about how it was based on rationality and autonomy. But we didn't really go into too much detail about that. Well, that's what this lesson is going to be doing. In the previous lesson, as I noted, we examined the nature of the categorical imperative, and in this next set of lessons, we're going to talk about some of the foundational elements of his normative ethical theories, in addition to a number of subsidiary elements to his normative ethical theories. So talking a little bit more about deontology, a little bit more about duty, a little bit more about rationality, autonomy, and human nature. So with regard to the first of these basic principles, this is the idea of autonomy. How does Kant understand autonomy? Well, according to a Kantian perspective, and according to Kant himself, autonomy simply refers to the capacity for self-governance and the ability for rational agents to act according to the principles they give themselves. This is something that we looked at in that early lesson when we discussed the foundations of Kantian ethics. We noted that autonomy is not only a capacity of self-governance, but also the capacity for rational agents to be able to act according to that self-governance, act according to those principles that have been, through the imposition of self-governance, given to themselves as rational agents. This actually stands in contrast to a different kind of principle, this different concept known as heteronomy. This is where actions are determined by external factors, and Kant includes in this regard things like desires, emotions, social pressure, etc., etc. Remember, the concept of the rational agent is really important here, because according to Kant, things like emotion and desires aren't considered to be in the remit of the basic understanding of the rational agent, so they are considered to be external factors. So desires, emotions, and social pressure, while some of those may be internal, like a desire, for example, to a person, they are not internal to a rational agent. With this being said then, autonomy firstly presupposes the idea of a rational agent, but then it in addition to this involves the idea that individuals are self-legislating beings. They have the capacity for self-governance. They give themselves moral laws based on the rationality that they have, that they acquire, and that they have as human beings, as human individuals. So moral principles, therefore, in the final extension of this basic principle, moral principles are not imposed externally. They're not imposed by society, for example, but they are instead chosen by individuals themselves. And they are chosen by individuals themselves as rational agents who are capable of making moral judgments. So it's very clear, therefore, that when we think about autonomy, that is a very, very key and important factor when it comes to making determinations about morality, according to Kant. And by extension, when we think about autonomy, that is a very that is something that requires rationality. Rationality is something that is, by extension, something that attaches itself to the idea of autonomy. And so when it comes to rationality, Kant argues that human beings essentially possess what he describes as a rational will. This is something that he distinguishes between humanity and humans on the one hand, and things like animals on the other hand, because animals are not able to act according to basic principles and maxims that are rationally endorsed by themselves. Animals can only really react and act according to their nature, the nature of irrational animals, irrational beings. They have to act in a way to survive, for example, act in a way to pass on their genetic material, act in a way to get food and to get water and to hunt and to gather and all these different kinds of things. So this concept of rationality, this rational will that Kant describes it as, allows individuals to deliberate about their actions. It allows individuals to choose freely about what decisions they're going to make and what actions they're going to take. It allows individuals to take responsibility for the decisions that they do eventually come to taking in the future. Kantian ethics, therefore, places a very high value on the idea of human dignity, on the idea of a person's capacity for autonomy as rational agents, as having and possessing a rational will. This, therefore, entails that individuals have to be treated as ends in themselves, because in order to treat individuals with respect for their autonomy, you have to treat individuals as ends in themselves rather than as a means to an end. So with all that being said, therefore, this provides us with more of the foundations, the theoretical, the ethical foundations from which we start to see a building of Kant's ethical principles. And so that's why we can make very strong and clear links to his categorical imperative. The categorical imperative is closely linked and closely tied to the concept of autonomy, specifically the principle of universalizability, because according to Kant, autonomy requires that moral principles are capable to be applied universally without contradiction. And this reflects the idea that rational agents, who are therefore acting autonomously, would naturally endorse principles that are consistent and applicable to all rational beings. So Kant ties into this idea of rationality and autonomy the idea of consistency and applicability, because according to Kant, if you are a rational and an autonomous being, then you will want and you will therefore endorse principles which are consistent and applicable to everybody who is also a rational being. So you would essentially, as an autonomous rational agent, accept the principle of universalizability, and so you would therefore accept the first principle of the categorical imperative. We know already that the second and third principles of the categorical imperative are foundationally linked to the basic understanding of humans as not being treated as ends in themselves, as a means to an end, but as ends in themselves, as an extension of the basic principle of autonomy. Which therefore we can therefore clearly see the foundational aspect of Kant's ethics and his philosophy be extended into his practical application with the categorical imperative.